So hello and Happy New Year. I am Peter Anik, the technical host for the ARARA online lecture series. Today, I also have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. But before I do, I'd like to remind you that ARARA membership is renewed on a yearly basis starting on January 1. So we would like to encourage everyone who has been enjoying our lecture series to either renew your membership or become a member for 2022. Your membership fees support ARARA's mission of rock art research, conservation, and education. Membership offers an opportunity for you to get directly involved in one of our committees. You will also receive our digital newsletter, La Pintura. And to join, just go to our website at arara.wildapricot.org. Click on the join or renew links at the top of the page. Now, if any of you have been watching the Beatles documentary Get Back over the holiday, you can rest assured that unlike JoJo in Get Back, tonight's speaker did not leave her home in Tucson, Arizona. However, she does play in a rock band. Janine Hernbrode's rock band is a group of volunteers who document and study rock art in the greater Tucson area. Over the past 16 years, Janine has utilized archaeological, ethnographic, landscape, linguistic, and statistical evidence to help in the interpretation of the iconography that she and her volunteers have been documenting. As we will hear, she even ventures beyond the visual to explore the acoustic properties of sites. So I'm happy to turn the microphone over now to Janine for our first talk of the 2022 season.
Thank you for inviting me this evening. I've spent the last 16 years investigating small parts of the same whole, every part within about 30 miles of Tucson, Arizona. They're puzzles of imagery, sounds, artifacts, interwoven with the findings of ethnographers and previous investigators. When it comes to repetition of imagery, the interplay of the landscape features with that imagery and sound, patterns repeat at sites used for ceremonial purposes for millennia. In recording the sites, our mantra has been 1 is nice, 2 is interesting, 3 is a pattern. However, when you accumulate 18,000 glyphs and 62 sites, the patterns are made up of many more than 3. Tucson occupies an ancient landscape along the Santa Cruz River. This is a landscape known to paleo-mammoth hunters. To hunter-gatherers, we can only describe as archaic. And in our investigations, we have encountered a few petroglyphs that appear truly ancient. If you look above the words hunter-gatherers on the screen, there are a couple of examples of things that we think are old enough to have reached far back through the millennia. So moving forward through time, and we're going to the next set of photographs. Look above the words hunter-gatherers on the screen for a couple of examples. I'm sorry, we're back to the other ones. And then we are moving to a time that we had a particularly favorable climate, and that was 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. And during that time, a group emerged that is now known as early agriculturalists. They used to be late archaic, but now with investigation, they've been renamed early agriculturalists. They were farming and irrigating much earlier than others in the American Southwest. The two examples above the words early agriculturalists I have identified through very fine pecking style and dark patination as older than the next group. And again, moving through time and taking up 1,000 years this time, there are people known archaeologically as the Hohokam were here, whose classic period included 3-story structures and mounds and beautiful shell ornaments. They also made their mark on the landscape, but their way of living declined around 1400 to 1450. And after that, there's evidence of use by the culture that is still here today, the Tohono O'odham people, whose nation is vast in southern Arizona.
Be back. Oh my
And
goodness. A surprise for Lucy?
Somebody's.
Donnie, you will have to mute yourself.
Oh, shoot.
And anybody else, please remember to mute yourself. Thank you, Janine. You can continue.
after that, there's evidence of use by the culture that's still here today, the Tohono O'odham people, whose nation is vast in southern Arizona and also includes a swath of northern Mexico. It's possible, and I believe it to be true, that these are largely the same people all through time. We've just chosen to label them with names that describe their standard of living at the time. Their history is deep. Their petroglyphs use some of the same symbols, use some of the same techniques in the same places, in what appears to be many of the same ways through time. The petroglyphs are strewn across a landscape with boulder exposures of all sides. In order to investigate this place, I fell serendipitously into a group of people who also wanted to record rock art and who were originally organized by the Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society and the University of Arizona. When that project was over, they were mine. We formed ourselves into the rock band. You know, it's easy to recruit people because everyone wants to say on their resume that they've been a member of a rock band. The current band is made up of rock art recorders, archaeologists, and photographers. And recently I've designated one of them to help me organize so I have more time to spend on research. He calls himself a roadie, but he's actually much more than that. I now have detailed data, sketches, and photographs for over 18,000 petroglyphs and pictographs, detailing the patterns of the repeat imagery, the rarity and distribution of certain motifs, the abundance of certain glyphs in related landscape. In the course of the 16 years, the rock band has worked for the Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society, Coronado National Forest, the Bureau of Land Management, a private ranch owner, Saguaro National Park, and presently Pima County. The traditions of the native people occupying this area are tied to the saguaro cactus. Here there are cacti so large they dominate the landscape. Tucson is a place where evidence has shown the ancient people irrigated floodplain gardens, where Jonathan Mabry found evidence showing intensive agriculture with higher labor requirements and higher yields than previously known for early farmers of the greater Southwest. These gardens were being cultivated in the Tucson Basin more than 4,100 years ago. On the left is a map from Mabry's report, and that shows the Santa Cruz River as it flows through Tucson. You can see Tucson's major east-west roads labeled, and the solid black areas, those are the places that have been dug because the road needs interchanges and widening. Those are long-term settlements in the early agricultural period. But not every place is suitable for a riverine lifestyle. The lushness of some of the desert is also interspersed with desiccation, scattered skeletons of bushes, and, let's face it, dust. People farmed some drier areas too by using rainwater catchments at the base of alluvial fans, living there long enough to plant and harvest. When the stored water was gone, they moved on to another location. So I've been asking, how is it that people can live here? What's the fabric of belief that holds their world together? And why is it inscribed in these places? After 62 sites, you might ask, what do the sacred sites have in common? In general, they are a homogeneous pile of boulders with a few outliers, but the main site has a concentration that lets you know the boulders themselves were selected for this purpose. In general, living structures and more practical food processing tools are absent or minimal. They're not living long-term at these places. Whether the site is a small pile of boulders like the one in the upper left, or like the medium pile of boulders below it, or like the absolutely stupendous pile of boulders on the right. Can you see the two people in the red circle in the lower area? It's clear that a boulder pile is on the list of what matters, but the size doesn't matter so much. Because we record the imagery on the boulders have been speaking to me. So what else matters? Water matters for both practical and spiritual reasons. Each site has either a present water source or evidence of having had a water source nearby. In a few instances, just the capability of having a water source, but the utilization evidence has been swept away by time. The cultural tradition of the autumn dictates that the water cycle begins under the ground, and the world that exists there has not only water, but the spirits of the ancestors. Water in the desert is intermittent. That it generates life, like the tadpole in the photo in the petroglyph nearby at right, or the canyon tree frogs and the shell frog effigy, it bespeaks of life beginning in the lower world, the tier of the universe that is below the ground, and like the water, it then emerges to the present world. I can't say that I know what each of the 62 sites was for, but the ones with flat areas large enough to be gathering places, many of them with a scatter of artifacts showing use. Those appear to echo the ethnographic accounts of ceremonial sites where a number of villages would gather together. A suitable place to gather together is also one of the things that matters. Another thing that matters in these spiritual places appears to be the sound of bells. Bell rocks came to our attention when we first encountered them in the Rocky Butte area, where there are 130 bell rocks. All of those have useware. But I've also made some observations that are common to two other huge petroglyph sites in southern Arizona, and at small sites, both nearby and at a distance. Some of the small sites are across a wide valley, 10 to 12 miles from Rocky, and with just a couple of exceptions, the boulders there do not ring naturally. Even though it's a heavily visited area, we've found portable bell rocks at 3 sites. I think the reason they've been safe from pilfering is that people have not recognized what they are. They don't look particularly valuable. The cultural use of ringing or bell rocks is a worldwide practice. Bell rocks are still being discovered. Recently, a Colorado-based archaeology working in Great Sand Dunes National Park accidentally tapped on an artifact she was investigating, and the sound was so sweet and startling that the hair on her arm stood up. The elongate, baguette-like stones from mid-Colorado resemble the kiva bells reported by Emily J. Brown in 2014. Brown found use of kiva bells widespread within the Rio Grande Valley and also reported a similar stone from a site in northern Arizona. A 1952 article in the New Mexican newspaper reported the discovery of a cache of kiva bells. Even though the article is unreadable in this photo, you can see the kiva bells from Cuyamonga, northwest of Santa Fe, are not uniformly shaped or particularly distinctive or identifiable. It's information like this that makes you put a wooden mallet in your pack and begin to tap on everything. And by the way, the bowls and pots and lots of other things in my kitchen ring. Ken Hedges' 1993 paper reported the cultural use of ringing or bell rocks is a worldwide practice. Here are a couple of examples, both from Africa, but bell rocks or gongs are found in Korea and China and Vietnam and Mexico and Bolivia, all around the world. On the right is a bell rock located along the Nile River above Cataract 4 in an area studied by Cornelia Kleinitz. The photo on the left is from Zimbabwe National Park. Look at the size of the boulder. Bell rocks are still being discovered, mostly because we are not accustomed to finding them and neglect to test for the sound. Henry Wallace wrote that when he first heard about bell rocks in 1993, he went back to a previously recorded site and found that the only so-called cupules he had recorded were actually strike indentations on bell rocks. In working the sites, we explored the properties of bell rocks, finding that the quality of the sound is influenced by the properties of the thing you're striking it with, which we call a striker, but also by the skill of the user, by the force of the strike, by the perch of the boulder on the ground. So here, a rock band member is using a wooden egg as a striker. So the strike zone patination is not affected. The sound here is also influenced by the quality of the microphone used to pick up the sound, unfortunately. And this is cell phone video. We've also used a wooden mallet that's softer than the surface of the boulder to ensure that the patination level on the strike zone won't be altered by our use. This assemblage of boulders that ring is at a different site. The striking along the lower edge is a common wear pattern at two large sites. You see it here along the lower edge. Note the patination level and thus the age of the glyphs and the strike zone that has been used more recently, but still not with modern use. So this person is going to strike these support boulders so that you can see that it does not ring after she strikes the ringing boulder. Let me see if I can do this. Oh, uh-oh, stop. Oh, well. A portable bell rock. Can you hear me at the same time? A portable bell rock found at a site where the rest of the boulders do not ring appears coincidentally just placed on one of the shelf-like boulders at the site. The use wear is in the form of really small pecks, randomly spread down the length of the stone, indicating probably something pointed was used as a striker. This is a pretty small pile of boulders, about 40 boulders, with only 26 petroglyphs on 6 of the boulders. By importing this ringing rock, sound properties have been provided at this site where none existed before. The surrounding boulders might have been used along with the ringing rock, but we did not find use where to testify to that use. Now here you can see that in the photo on the left, the view of the site showing how casually the ringing rock is left at the site. It's right up here. Native tobacco also grows in this same niche, not uncommon finding at these sites during the right time of year. I don't have enough evidence yet because I can't visit all of them at the right time of year, but I believe tobacco and datura may also be things that matter. So why do bell rocks ring? I can give you a partial answer. No, it isn't hollow. No, it has no special crystals. Those are things that people usually ask me. It's physics, actually, and that's probably why they don't ask me that. When the bell rock is struck, you're setting it in motion with a sound wave passing through the boulder, so it is vibrating. To me, one of the remarkable things about these boulders is that even boulders that weigh between 1/2 and more than 2 tons will vibrate with sound. My brother is a cutting-edge engineer, and he says to facilitate the vibrations, the rock must be the same composition all the way through and absent anything like a crack or a cluster of crystals or some other aberration that will stop and deaden the wave as it goes through the rock. So homogeneity throughout facilitates the movement of the wave. Positioning is also necessary. It should touch surrounding boulders as little as possible. Burying it in dirt happens to cancel the sound at approximately the same ratio as the amount buried. It should be suspended as much as possible, and you can enhance the sound by propping it up off of other boulders like this one has been. So do you see the strike zones on the underside of the rock? Here and here and here and here and here. So this one was hit from below, and I can't imagine lifting that kind of rock so that you can prop it up. This is a huge boulder with use wear down the left edge, but the boulder does not ring. Underneath this boulder, in a niche, I found an artifact, a piece of bomb tuff that does ring. In the last part of the video, you can hear how the bomb tuff rings when you strike it on one end, sending the sound wave along the longest length. First, I'll strike the use wear to show that it doesn't ring, although that clack clack may have been utilized too. Again, cell phone video, so the microphone doesn't pick up all of the sound. In this example, it's the striker that rings, and this is the second ringing striker I'm aware of. So clack, clack, clack. There's the ring. If you were holding it loosely, I think it would ring when you hit the rock with it. I had a piece of bomb tuff to experiment with that I got from a volcanic area in west central Arizona. It's more gelatinous when being flung from the volcano, but it hardens into rock, and it has an uneven surface that rings well, and I wanted to hear what the sound would be from such a surface. Unfortunately, I got too enthusiastic with my experiments and I broke it. When I looked at it, I thought it would still ring because a chunk just came off the end. But it just made a really flat clunking sound, so I investigated further. I found several cracks across the rock, and it wouldn't ring anymore. So I glued it back together and found, once again, it rang, but it's like pinging a repaired pot. The voice is no longer quite the same. This is another video, but I'm not going to play it all the way through. But using our wooden mallets, we tried pounding on the strike indentations that form from striking the boulder in the same place over and over to produce as much sound as possible. So the people that are hovering over the boulder heard increased sound, but did not hear the aurora of sound we expected. I'll start the video. Our experiments also found that everyone pounding on one end of the boulder in unison, particularly the most abraded end, produced more sound than all the other combinations of striking the boulder. Unison created the wave and sent it through the boulder, allowing the wave to get larger and the sound to get louder. Another characteristic of the bell rock is that a number of them, in addition to having strike mark impressions, also have evidence of being abraded, some of them very greatly abraded. I consulted Jenny Adams, a brownstone expert, and she suggested an experiment replicating this use wear on non-cultural boulders. My experiment showed the abrading makes a few decibels more sound, but the big difference is that it makes continuous sound. There are accounts from ethnographers of the autumn who are related to the holcomb, noting that the Wicca ceremony has a very loud portion that made one observer withdraw, in his words, to a mile away where he was more comfortable with the sound. It appears the holcomb may have generated huge sounds as part of their rituals too. Whether the purpose was to drive away evil or even signal the populace, provide special drama for a special story, replicate the roar of thunder or other natural phenomena, or I guess for any other reason. The capabilities of these boulders combined with their positions are impressive. And speaking of position, the acoustics of the site also contributes to the volume and distribution of the sound. 2/3 of the way up this petroglyph-covered Inselberg is a niche behind a broken boulder and surrounded by other large boulders. Words spoken here can be heard in the parking area across the creek below. A bell rock with more use wear than any of the other 130 bells at the site rests in that niche. My experiments suggest that abrading this rock in this location would result in a continuous roar that would fill the area below. Hey, it's a big flat area down there, suitable for gathering. Some of the bell rocks have been used in more modern times. Around the edges of the strike zones, you can see the usage marks from pre-contact times. The patination is the same as that of the Hohokam petroglyphs on the same mountainside. The use wear has been best preserved on the example in the upper left from a more remote site. The area of the two boulders pictured at right was in use by the autumn after the Hohokam lifestyle ceased about 1450 and before the ethnographers started to visit in the late 1800s. Some of the brighter white strike zones could be cultural use. Some could be modern non-cultural visitors. If you're going to seek out bell rocks, please use a striker that's softer than the boulder so it preserves the evidence of pre-contact use. A bell rock with an uneven surface has a special sound. I was able to use the non-cultural rock with an uneven surface to test dragging the striker across it. It results in a bring sound that must have made music even more exciting. There's a light trail from end to end on this bell that may have been from such use. At 4 smaller petroglyph sites, we have found portable bell rocks at places where the natural rocks don't ring. They're small, ring somewhat less impressively, but they reveal the possibility that this was a necessary sound in the Hohokam rituals performed at these petroglyph sites. They do not have extensive use wear, maybe because they don't really need to ring, but just be there as a substitute for one of the characteristics that make a site sacred. In fact, bell sounds were apparently so necessary that a large petroglyph site with more than 3,000 petroglyphs and no bell rocks had a hidden cache of about 24 precious copper bells, along with an estimated 100,000 beads. I say estimated because they just weighed them and guessed at how many there were. So Mircea Eliade, working in Eastern Europe in the 1950s, defined ritual sites as places where the landscape features have breakthrough points, where the sacred is revealed to humans, and a place where its innate power can be recognized in mysterious signs. These are examples illustrating that the awe-inspiring, imperceptible forces that Eliade found in the physical landscape at ritual sites can be influenced by human modification. The presence of the portable bells, be they bell rocks or copper bells, at these sites suggests that their import was imperative, either to perform specific rituals or to complete the site characteristics to make the location appropriate. They're a hint that sites lacking some of the necessary characteristics can be enhanced. That increases the sacredness of the site. Surely portable and naturally present bell rocks join petroglyphs in making a site sacred. We are in Tohono O'odham ancestral lands. In O'odham tradition, Sacred objects included things like the quartz crystals kept by the medicine man, the trophy Apache belongings kept by the enemy slayer, the seashells or pebbles kept by the person who undertook the salt journey, or the eagle down kept by the eagle killer. Sacred objects also include stones that look like a person's animal guardian spirit. These items are said to hold power. Bell rocks are fairly rare, although we don't know specifically how their power was viewed. Imagine how special a bell rock would be if its shape was also suggestive of an animal head. My first thought when I saw this bell rock is, that's a bird head, but the small beak suggested something like the Montezuma quail. We saw black vultures roosting at Kokoraki several times while we were recording the rock art there. And when I searched the bird book for likely suspects, the elongate head shape and the wattle seems to match that boulder shape better. This one has been shaped to represent something specific that is animate, and it rings beautifully. You can see the abraded shaping on the lower edge. The abrading could also have been the way to get this boulder vibrating and thus roaring. Autumn ethnography divides the Tohono Autumn into two moieties, buzzard, which is the colloquial name for this animal, and coyote. Yeah, sorry about the shadow on the beak area of this possible parrot. I'm thinking parrot rather than raptor. You can see the head shape. You see the photo of the red-tailed hawk and the beak, and I think the parrot shape of head and beak is more likely. I'm in a discussion right now with Ken Hedges about whether this is a thick-billed parrot or possibly a macaw, both occurring in Arizona in unusual times. The macaws having been imported and then grown by the Hohokam for import to the Pueblos. The thick-billed parrots are occasional visitors to southern Arizona, and in 1904, I think it was, the huge flocks came to feed on pine nuts and were variously counted by people as 700 or 1,000 birds. There are more shapes of bell rocks, and I'm sure we can't possibly recognize some of them that are more culturally based. But one characteristic of bell rocks in southern Arizona is that they can be shaped to represent something, and the ones that we recognize appear animate, and of course they can be said to have voices. Jenny Adams has worked with people internationally who are still using natural grinding features, so she better understands the relationship and the animacy applied to those things than that we would consider not alive. Speaking about the autumn worldview, she said, if the past was like the present, then mundane and sacred are not as separate as they are in our culture. Almost everything has a life history that needs to be honored, and these ringing boulders have special voices. They may have been used in both ritual and non-ritual contexts. They may even have been used for entertainment. But these are ritual places, and song is the vehicle for autumn ritual. Song makes your crops grow, and song helps cure your ailments, and song even announces that you should come see an enemy scalp. There are indications that the voices of bells are more than just an accompaniment or an entertainment. By the time the early ethnographers visited autumn rituals in the late 18 and early 1900s, rituals took place in churchyards and villages rather than petroglyph sites with bell rocks. You would expect bell ringing to continue through time, even though the ceremony moved to a different location, though. And in the 1900s, portable bells, what we would call cowbells, were available and were part of the participants' costumes in the ceremonies. The drawing is from a 1936 report by Julian Hayden with illustrations by Isabel Pendleton. The cowbell and other parts of the costume were collected about 1909, and the photo is from the catalog of the American Museum of Natural History. It appears that the bell sounds were part of the spiritual life of the Hohokam, and certainly were part of the lives of their descendants, the O'odham. The Wikida, the autumn ceremony that provides for the ongoing well-being of the earth, features both numerous clowns and cornmeal sprinklers adorned with bells and shell tinklers. Bells are common in Native American costumes. You know, who doesn't like bells? But the research shows bells are more connected to the sacred than we have previously considered. We've been recording the visual aspects of sights, and we've been aware of things like echoes and other sound phenomena. We should be listening to and mentioning in our reports the clack of sandstone underfoot, the path of voices across the canyon, bell rocks, and other sound characteristics as part of those reports. Another part of the Hohokam ceremonial world is something that appears to be illustrated in petroglyphs. It's called by anthropologists the flower world. First of all, Native Americans do not recognize something called the flower world, although they do focus on the importance of flowers in curing, in seeking personal power, and in agriculture. What anthropologists are calling the flower world is a Mesoamerican reference to a flowery spirit world where everything is sparkling and intensely colorful, their butterflies are dancing, and the beauty just covers you with a sense of well-being. And it has a very deep history. I think it's another of those mysterious signs revealed to humans in special places that Mircea Eliade was talking about in the 1950s. Finding something breathtakingly beautiful like a sunset or the flash of iridescent color from a hummingbird or a field of flowers calls up that spiritual world. In 1992, Jane Hill, a University of Arizona linguist, found evidence of the flower world belief in the songs of 30 southwestern tribes today. She had noticed that when Native Americans who spoke language related to the Uto-Aztecan language base used their word flowery, they used it in a different way than non-tribal English speakers. The English meaning is all about embellishment, while the references in Native song were metaphors where flowers stand for the life force, and objects and beings are labeled flowery. Her linguistic evidence showed that this use of flowery probably dates back thousands of years before the 30 languages diverged. But of course, not so fast, because it isn't only flowers. In 1999, Kelly Hayes Gilpin and Jane Hill looked at material culture for colorful objects like paintings on ceramics and flowers and birds made from wood or gourds, jewelry and kiva paintings that depicted flowers, birds, butterflies, and rainbows. Some of the objects were from ritual caches in caves, which we don't have down here in the Hohokam area. They found little evidence for the flower world in the Hohokam until about 1300, if at all. They suggested that someone go look at petroglyphs, but no one did, except my colleague Peter Boyle and I did. Rainbows are hard to identify in rock art, but butterflies and birds are not. We have arcs and nested arcs, but it's hard to tell if rainbows were intended without color. We do have iridescent and colorful birds. I showed you a parrot depicted on a bell rock earlier. I believe the bird on the bottom left in the drawing down here, I think that's a roadrunner. Underneath this less colorful exterior is exquisite iridescence. We also have flowers on ceramics starting in about AD 750, but they're not abundant. All in all, it appears to me that flowers, birds, butterflies, and possibly rainbows do occur in the whole calm homeland. And the importance of this imagery figures prominently in autumn spiritual practice. Even though the native folk do not call it the flower world, it appears this complex of imagery is present in the Tucson area. The truth is, I don't believe anyone has really looked outside the Tucson area. Henry Wallace told me once about a site that was within the Acumel Autumn territory in the Gila River Indian community that has lots of what he terms wheels. I think they're likely highly stylized flowers, and the ideas represented by the flowers and other colorful things are probably more widespread than has been investigated. The pattern that's evident among the whole calm imagery is a progression from barbell through a couple of intermediate steps and finally to human beings. So read left to right here. I think it may actually be circle to lollipop to barbell to human, but the data is better for barbell to intermediate steps to human. And we'll talk about circles and lollipops in a few minutes, I think. What my colleague and I have been able to document is a transition, possibly a transformation, but it looks like a progression. And I'll show you the finished product first and then show you some of the panels that seem to apply. The ethnography talks about humans not being finished when born. So maturation is another process that we might consider. We sorted the images at two huge sites into the four categories you see above, plain barbells on the left, and then the second category, barbells with some additions, but not enough to call it an anthropomorph. And then an image that anyone would call a human, but with the circles for the hands and legs still closed. And finally, an anthro with arms and legs unconnected, but still reminiscent of its barbell origins. Usually the imagery doesn't appear on the same boulder, but at larger sites, every category has at least several images. These are from a different large site. This is the advantage of a large site. There are many examples in each group. Again, we have plain barbells on the left, barbells showing some development, but not looking human yet. And then barbells that anyone will record as an anthro, but with the circles still closed. And finally, an anthro with the circles open. There are also straight-legged humans, which may have been a convention showing maturity or possibly an acknowledgement that you've reached a level of respect through your deeds. The ethnography for the autumn mentions ways to gain respect. You can become a skilled deer hunter and share your bounty. You can make the grueling journey across the desert to the ocean for salt, a journey with water deprivation and personal peril. You can kill an eagle or other large and dangerous animal, or you can kill an enemy. The accomplishments signify a transition from youth to maturity that goes further than the development pictured here. I said I'd mention this extension. Circles are so ubiquitous, they must represent more than an egg-like beginning. But this panel makes me wonder about the transition from circle to lollipop to barbell to human. A closer shot, let me see. Closer shot gives you a better look at the oldest of the images. So I've divided it in half and given you a closer look at two parts of it. So you can see this panel has been renewed through time. Of course, the oldest of the images are to the right of the bright ones in the first photo and are very repatinated. Can you see them here? Circles, some of them are connected by little stems. And then the next level is a kind of dull tan shown in the second photo over here. And then back to the brightest ones here that is likely autumn use. So to me, it looks like life beginning in a soup of primordial ooze well before anyone ever thought of that. And this one is brought to you by the Hohokam themselves. The figure in the middle is an elongate barbell. Both of the circles are still closed. The one on the right has a closed circle below, but the upper circle is open and the figure has fingers. The dark natural inclusion in the rock may be representing a head, but then none of the other inclusions are utilized, so it's hard to say whether the head shape was intentional or not. On the upper left is the mostly finished figure. It seems to be holding an unattached head between the hands, but everything else is complete, and technically the upper circle will open after the attachment of the head. Barbells sometimes appear on the underside of boulders as though they form in the lower world. At first, we thought the boulders had been just rolling down the mountain and lodging wherever they were going to lodge. But at one site, there were 3 with images on the underside, like the 2 on the left, and another that was leaning at a low angle. The middle image shows older barbells under a hohokam figure. And I'm going to point them out because they are hard to distinguish. You see, there's a barbell. Here's one. I'm not sure what this hohokam figure is. Might be a ladder, but it also could be a being. It seems to have animate features. In the last one over there, they appear below a prominent ledge across the middle of the boulder. In all instances illustrated here, they appear to illustrate an existence in space lower than the things in the present world. All of these barbells that are apparently slated to become humans appear to form in the lower world, just as the ethnography indicates. So after development in the lower world, they need a place to emerge. The ethnography says the autumn emerged as a group from a hole in the ground. The pattern I have found in the landscape and the rock art is that they appear to emerge from a hole created when a boulder splits into 2 pieces, like the photo on the left. This is a pattern that's more common in our area than the existence of caves in the landscape. On a worldwide basis, caves are acknowledged as a good place to travel to the lower world. Usually there are barbells or partial barbells and sometimes only circles associated with the openings that we have investigated. At one site, the pictures show the path illustrated in a slightly different way. There are 41 panels where rows of people appear to be maturing together. Sometimes they have legs and arms, and sometimes a head and legs. Sometimes they come from the edge of the rock, like the row of figures in the upper right. Sometimes their heads are so engulfed by raised arms, they're just little nubs, like the group in the lower left. And that group is accompanied by a very large bird. You see the bird down here? They appear to be partially developed human forms, sometimes connected, sometimes just rode up, both, I presume, so they can emerge together and eventually become more recognizable. Sometimes they're illustrated in a grid-like manner where they're all fused together. Note the cupped legs on one of the barbells in the panel on the left. The group on the right has only slightly cupped legs, and their boulder is stuck into the hillside, perfectly illustrating emerging from the earth as a group. And I will close with illustrations of what a couple of anthropologists, Aaron Wright and Will Russell, identified as the tiered cosmos, the belief that there are a number of levels of the universe in addition to the present where we reside. The levels are represented by boxes or elongate circles with passageways, kind of axis mundi up the middle, allowing access to each level. These sacred places are places of spiritual transcendence and should be visited with great respect. The worldview of the ancient southern Arizona cosmos is remarkably like our own, an ancient human tradition that explains how people came to be and how it is celebrated. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak this evening. I hope your explorations and thoughts are enhanced by some of these ideas.
Well, thank you, Janine. Let's see, let me appreciate that. I think my head is ringing from all those interesting thoughts that you've presented.
They really
So at
do
this,
ring more beautifully than I was able to capture with a cell phone, but
I think
you
it
can
came
come and
through.
see yourself.
It came through well. So at this point, if people have questions, they can put them into the chat. Um, you definitely gave us a lot to think about. So we do have a couple here. Um, and you did address this, but maybe you want to address this in a little bit more detail. The question came in is how do we know which way the progression went, right? Because uh, couldn't we have the barbell sort of at the end as opposed to at the beginning of this transformation?
There doesn't seem to be anything that goes from straight-legged beings down to cupped legs. But I'm open to all ideas, and if you would really like to think of it as a reverse, then I suppose that's possible. But then are you stored as a barbell down there in the lower level? Because it seems more likely that those are the beginning form, and it's going to bloom and come out. At least that's how I think about it.
Yeah, how consistent are the barbells sort of underneath? And do you ever find the anthropomorph forms showing up like at the bottom of the stones?
Underneath.
Yeah.
Usually, if something is underneath, you can tell that it has rolled down the mountain in some way.
Hmm.
Uh, Although I have seen spirals underneath and concentric circles that I think may have sun interactions on them at certain times of the year or something like that. Um, uh, Repeat the question because I don't think I've even gotten there.
Okay, because I mean, you gave some
Are there other
examples,
things underneath?
right, where the examples where the barbells were underneath, and you're talking about that might have been them being in the lower world and then eventually transforming into the upper world. Do you get this? Do you get the case where you have anthropomorphs underneath, a stone, or do you only find
I'm
barbells
sure
there?
there are. I'm sure there are because these images have been placed on the rocks for thousands of years, and someone must have thought of that. I can't recall anything right now. 16,000
Yeah.
petroglyphs. I can't recall any that are specifically uh, anthropomorphs underneath, but there should be some. And recently we've investigated a small cave that has anthropomorphs in it, and that would be the same sort of situation where the cave is underneath the level of the ground. So I'm sure it's possible. I haven't done the statistics.
Yeah, and as far as you know, rock art, the practice of creating this images sort of ended at contact, or did some of it continue post contact?
I think it's quite possible that it even continues today.
Okay, but we don't have any sort of
Uh,
direct evidence of that. So, in other words, we can't get interpretation from modern Native Americans on these.
no.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, some other questions. Is there any association between tadpoles and barbells, or frog metamorphosis and the evolution of humans?
Oh, I would love to go for frog metamorphosis. I've been thinking about that for a long time, but I don't have enough background and information to pursue that. I hope someone is pursuing that though, because uh, it looks very much like frog metamorphosis.
Yeah. Although you would expect instead of barbells, you'd expect to have one round with a tail rather than two heads, right? Or two
Yeah.
circles.
We we do have clusters of circles with dots in the middle of each one that always makes me think of frog eggs developing I guess because I live with a biologist and we've seen that a lot. But I don't have any connection with the ethnography to even begin to say that that could be true. Frogs are very important in the Holcomb tradition, though.
Okay, here's a question about, well, actually, let's stick with another question about barbells. So someone says, I have observed barbell shapes in Inyo County, California. Do you suppose that the same meanings as found at Tucson sites can be conferred to these sites in California?
Oh, I'd love to say so, but I think you have to do your own research. And I recommend a whole band of volunteers to help you.
Yeah, so maybe those of you who are finding barbells at other sites, look to see whether you've got the anthros, that resemble barbells at some of those other sites. That might be interesting to see if we get the whole constellation of features related to the barbells. Okay, here's a different topic. Let's see, where'd it go? Any of the strongly abraded areas tested for a corn pollen DNA residue? So,
No.
No, nothing yet?
No.
Nothing done like that.
They've been exposed for quite a long time. I'd love to find one that was hidden or not part of this huge pile of boulders that's been weathered for a very long time. But if we did find corn pollen, do you think that the abrading then was from food production or from an offering? And
Yeah,
I don't know how we would decide that.
Right, but at least we know that there was corn as part of the mix. Let's put it that way. Right.
We often find very light abrading that is part of larger panels. And the only thing that I've discussed this with Henry Wallace, and it was his suggestion that that was someone giving an offering, something that was intended just to fly away and not to be captured in any way.
Okay, another question about wear patterns and such. Do you find what look like bell rocks in terms of the wear patterns, but that don't ring?
Yes,
And
that don't ring very well.
right,
Yeah.
because percussion would still create some sound, right? Presumably.
Yes, and yes. So when we started our studies, we rejected all the ones that weren't so pleasant to hear, and over the course of the studies, we corrected that idea because what is pleasant to our ears might, or unpleasant to our ears, might be pleasant to someone else. In particular, I remember a very large boulder with a lot of use wear that was at the bottom of the mountain that we tested, and it just had a clacking sound. I need to go back and see if its trip down the mountain has somehow cracked it or something. It's a very large boulder, though. I don't think I'll be able to roll it over for any reason at all, but I am very curious about that one. Usually the ones that are most abraded are the ones that ring really, really well.
Okay, yeah, because like you say, in those big boulder piles, things can shift, and even a small shift could stop it from ringing, right? So you do have the possibility that you have something that rang at one point and is abraded accordingly, and then later on, after it moved, it no longer rang.
Well, I think it would still ring as long as it was not either cracked or buried in other boulders, so that the vibrations would stop. Something has to stop the vibration. And just rolling down the hill shouldn't be so bad unless, of course, it was cracked or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit about current opinions of the Native Americans. So this question is related to that. Have you shared this information with the Autumn to get their general perspectives, interpretations, worldview, etc.?
Yes, and that is why I am talking about the flower world in those terms. I had a very nice discussion with one of the cultural resources people who is now retired. And he said that if there was such a thing as a flower world, he thought that he would probably know about it. And I what can you say? Of course, if it's I'm not talking about my own culture. I'm talking about their culture. And if the flower world tradition, the idea of this magnificent world, if that has not come up through the 7 to 9,000 years since the beginning of the languages, then what can you say?
Yeah. Um, okay. Here's another question, kind of a uh, similar issue. So how do you recommend justifying recording a ringing rock? I think it says boulder field when there is no ethnographic record for the area or artifacts associated with the sites. There are pits and grooves covering almost every boulder in the field, but it has mostly been attributed to unusual weathering patterns. So I'm assuming they're talking about a site in a different area, and they're trying to figure out how they can decide whether this is related to ringing, right? So there are pits and grooves covering almost every boulder in the field, but it has mostly been attributed to unusual weathering patterns. There are several ringing rock boulder fields fitting this description in Pennsylvania, as well as baguette-shaped pestles that ring beautifully. So how do you think they might go about trying to determine, whether this is a similar kind of phenomenon?
I'd recommend getting a wooden mallet and going out there. You can't deny that it rings,
Yeah,
and
but then how do
you can't deny that ringing objects were used ritually.
yeah, I think the
Uh,
problem that they're having, if I'm reading the comment correctly, is that there is no ethnographic record for this area or any artifacts associated with the site. So they have ringing rocks, but they
oh,
can't necessarily say they were culturally recognized, right?
oh,
So that's what they're looking at, trying to figure out whether there's some way that they could, identify whether this is actually cultural phenomena or just, not actually recognized at some point.
so we have found strikers underneath the boulders from time to time. Not when you consider the total number of them, I'm not sure what your chances are of finding such a thing. But then the striker has use wear on it too, indicating that
Right.
yeah, usually just on one end.
Yeah, so that might be a good thing to look for in those cases. Here's a question again on lithophones. One of the clearest accounts of lithophones I've heard, but referring to your talk, but on the question of barbells to anthropomorphize, is a good verb for you. I suspect the assumption of mimetic realism as a progression. I'm not exactly sure.
Is
Maybe,
this a
maybe
support of progression from one to the next to the next to the next?
yeah. If you want to clarify your question or comment, please do in the chat, and I'll try to rephrase it.
Okay, well, I have several suggestions that this could be a transformation, it could be a progression, it could be, it could be something else, it could be maturation. So I think this person is suggesting progression is the best idea. Do you read it that way?
Well, there's two ways you can interpret the word suspect. One is that you don't trust it, or the other one is that you do suspect it. So that's why I think some clarification could help on that one.
Okay.
Um, let's see. Okay, here's another thing about the barbells. What about regarding the barbells as plan view from above, sight path forms?
I have no idea. Do you know what we are talking about?
Look, basically, it looks like if you're looking from above, like a lot of Australian rock art is
Ah,
like looking down from above. Might that
mhm.
be one way to think about how to interpret the barbell forms? And sight path as one possible interpretation. So going from one place to another.
I'm sorry, you're beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, barbells is a great mystery, right? Because they are pretty pervasive. And I mean, you've at least got a good hypothesis. Um, so
It seems to work.
yeah. So I think looking for the full progression at other sites that have barbells would be an interesting thing to do.
You have to have a large site though. Barbells are everywhere, and they and circles in particular. If you come to you're walking down a canyon, there's a cleft in the rock, and next to it you might find some circles and barbells. In fact, that's what I usually see, at least in this area. So it makes me wonder, well, is this supposed to be one of those paths to the lower world? Or what did someone have in mind? But there really isn't enough evidence to try to find out. So very large sites. I recommend very large sites for that particular thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times with this, you kind of have to come up with a hypothesis and then you see whether other sites tend to validate it or not. Um, because in some sense, it's conjecture until we can find enough evidence to make it more than that, right? So let's see. In reply to a question, in reply, okay, someone says in reply to the question, cornmeal or pollen grinding, it says holy water parallel. If a remote site may be a way to take home a tiny part of the sacred. Um,
Oh,
so that's another interesting thought, right? So like
mm,
taking home some holy water, take home a little bit of the stone.
works for me.
Yeah. Um, okay, let's see. Yeah, so you definitely got people thinking about these, obviously from this. I think we've kind of covered most of the comments in the chat. Um, yeah, so I don't see anything else. Yeah, so the commenter said on the question about what the word suspect meant, it says, my suggestion is that progression is a suspect assumption. Okay,
Oh,
so
okay. We'll go with the others then.
we'll go with the others. That's right.
How do you feel about maturation and transformation?
Yeah, I think we all know how hard it is to interpret rock art, and particularly to be able to validate interpretations, right? Nearly impossible, but it's hard to resist, right? And might as well give it a try and see if it seems to, work over, like you say, larger and larger sample sizes.
One
Um,
of my friends recently said, "You must be buried in data," and I think that pretty well describes it. Yes.
yeah. Well, it's nice to have all that to work with, and I know you like working with statistics as well, right? So you can, you have a lot to chew on there.
Yeah. I don't plan to die really soon, though, so
Good.
we're, we still have time.
Excellent. You left us with a lot to chew on as well, and we thank you for that.
Thank you.
Um, so I will, on behalf of everybody who attended, would like to thank you for your presentation. To all the attendees, if you would like to learn more about ARARA, please remember to check our website, our Facebook pages, and if you're so inclined, now is a good time to renew or join our membership. Our next event will be on February 12th with John Harmon, who will be speaking about D-Stretch, which is a technology that reveals things, particularly from painted rock art, that can be either difficult or impossible to see. So it's a very fascinating technology that's been used worldwide, and I think you're all going to want to see that presentation. So until then, good evening, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you.